He is excellent. Excellent.
Great.
Okay,
Good
John,
evening.
can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Perfectly.
All right.
Thank you.
We are beginning with the opening prayer from LeVar Crooms, the chaplain of the Theta Orlando chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
Good evening. Let's bow our heads, go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we humbly come before your throne, spirit of thanksgiving and praise for another day you've allowed us to see, for waking us up this morning, life, health, strength, your overall goodness and mercy towards all of us that we could be here tonight. Father, we say thank you. We thank you for bringing us together for this occasion as we endeavor to spotlight the need for our community to continue to exercise our voice at the polls. Father, give us the wisdom to fully appreciate the sacrifices of our forefathers as we move through this panel discussion. This and all things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you for the Crooms. Next, we will go to Keith Lang, the president of the Theta Orlando chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, for opening remarks.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining, and I'd like to send a special thanks to all our partners in this panel. We have the Phi Nu Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Arlington and Alexandria branches of the NAACP, and Progress for All, of course. And we want to thank our panelists, Congressman Scott and Beyer, for joining us. This is an effort we've been undertaking as part of our Voteless People is a Hopeless People program, which is one of the national programs of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Is one of our most important endeavors. And of course, we all know it's critically important that we educate and mobilize voters in this election year. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I hope we have a spirited discussion, and thanks to all our partners again.
All right. Thank you, Keith Lang, for those remarks. Next, we will move to the introduction of our keynote speaker by Congressman Don Beyer, representative for the 8th District of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Take it away, Don.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a small part of this. I'm very grateful and impressed that you have put this together. I think Black Men Vote is historically and in present terms a very powerful initiative. I'm an old white male, so on the very privileged side, but just wise enough to be familiar with the long history of first you've been denied citizenship, and then denied the vote for all those years. In the Virginia I grew up in the 1950s, we still had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, you had to keep the receipts for 3 years in a row. And now, once again, after the Supreme Court has struck down the Voting Rights Act, there are voter suppression efforts going on all over the country. So coming together as you have to make sure that everyone has a place in the ballot box, has a right to self-determination is just critical. So thank you. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce my dear and old friend. He's not old, but he's been a friend for a long time, Bobby Scott. Bobby, I first ran across Bobby 40 years ago when I was putting together a flyer for gubernatorial candidate Jerry Beliles. And I used a handsome picture of young Senator Bobby Scott and Delegate Jerry Beliles, Attorney General Jerry Beliles together. Only later did I get a phone call from Bobby to tell me he had not endorsed Jerry Beliles in that primary. And he was a little mad at me for outing him inappropriately. But I then went on to serve with him in the Virginia Senate for a number of years. Bobby was first elected as a child to the Virginia House in like 1977. He was way below the age of 30. And then elected to the Senate, where he served with distinction. 1992, he survived a primary with only 67% of the vote, and I don't think he's been challenged since. So in the next term, Bobby will set the record for the longest serving member of the Virginia delegation. Right now, he's the dean of our delegation. So he's the one who convenes all 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans to move forward with anything. You know, his dad was a pioneering African-American surgeon in Virginia, and his mom was a chemist. His dad was the first African-American ever appointed to the Newport News School Board. Bobby went on to Harvard, Boston College Law School, Massachusetts Army National Guard, the Army Reserve. But when he was elected in 1992, he was the first African-American to serve in the Congress from Virginia since Reconstruction. He's been a powerful leader. You probably, if you haven't been invited to his Labor Day picnic, try to get on the list because it's a major campaign stop. You can't run for president in America unless you go to Bobby Scott's Labor Day picnic. But I've been mostly impressed with him for all the years I've watched him in the Virginia Senate and in the U.S. House, just show outstanding leadership. Of course, he's the immediate past chair of the House Education and Labor Committee, and a few months from now, he'll be the chairman again. But I am always paying attention to when people take hard votes. It's easy to vote for something when every Democrat votes for it or 350 people vote for it. But I want to pick out 3, one ancient and one unique thing. Back in 2002, 2003, Bobby was one of those rare votes who voted against the Iraq War, what was later called the most strategic mistake in American history. But he was brave enough to do it. Just today, we had a resolution on the House floor that passed with 350 votes, defining anti-Semitism. An easy thing to vote yes for, but Bobby was brave enough to say, look, this is a really bad definition. It will make it impossible to say critical things about the government of Israel, about Netanyahu, and voted against it. A small minority, but a brave minority. And one that's sort of quirky and iconoclastic, but a few weeks ago, we voted to throw George Santos, the prolific liar from Long Island, out of the U.S. House. And Bobby was one of, I think, 2 or 3 votes to vote no.
3
and
Democrats.
When people asked him, 3 Democrats. When people asked him about it, he said because he didn't get due process, that he is always worried about the law being followed to the T. I mean, he's a Judiciary Committee, a leader for a long time, and not afraid to do the right thing, to be a principled man who's led on virtually every progressive issue over the last 40 years. So it's my great honor to introduce my friend and my hero, Congressman Bobby Scott, by the way, whose birthday was yesterday. So happy birthday, Bobby.
Well, thank you, Don, for your very kind introduction. It was full of inaccuracies and exaggerations, but that's fine. We're friends. You left out the part where we worked together in the state senate when you were lieutenant governor. I was your lieutenant governor when I ran for Congress and did a great job as lieutenant governor. And regrettably, you didn't serve as governor, but you've done a great job as ambassador to Switzerland and as a member of the United States Congress. So it's been a pleasure to serve with you. Some of the exaggerations, I wasn't way under 30 when I got elected. I was 30. And I hadn't endorsed Bilals yet. I did eventually endorse Bilals, made a lot of people mad, but it turned out to be a great endorsement because he did a phenomenal job as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. But you've done a phenomenal job as a member of Congress representing Northern Virginia. We worked on a lot of stuff. We're working on that airport issue that we're dealing with right now as a delegation. So thank you for your kind introduction. And I want to thank Progress for All, the Arlington and Alexandria branches of the NAACP. I see Cozy Bailey on the call. He's the state president. The Phi Nu Omega chapter of the AKAs. And Theta Rho chapter of my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. I got my black and gold tie on. And it is a pleasure to be with you today. And this is a very important call because this election, everybody says an election is the most important in your lifetime. This one really is because it will determine whether or not we even have a democracy after this election. Anybody that read and takes seriously the Time magazine interview that Donald Trump just gave where he talks about violence as a natural response to losing an election. He talks about dictatorship, talks about pardoning everybody who was involved in January 6th. I mean, just goes on and on, criminalizing abortion, including women. I mean, just a shocking display of arrogance and what we don't need in a democracy. And so this is a great, very important election. And it's one of the problems we've got is that although just about everybody in America is better off under Biden than they were under Trump, okay, Democrats are bad at messaging. And when you compound that with the fact that Republicans lie, they get away with everything. They talk about the bad economy. Bad economy under Trump, worst job performance in 100 years. Under Biden, best ever. He broke the record in 2 years for a 4-year term and has been adding to that. Longest period of time with unemployment under 4% since the 1960s. I mean, by every measure, we are much better off than we were 4 years ago, but people kind of have the idea that the economy was better. The Republicans get away with complaining as if it is the solution. 2 years ago, if you voted for inflation on the issue of inflation, you voted Republican. Well, they complained about inflation. What did Democrats do about inflation? Well, you had thousands of dollars worth of inflation that you had to come up with. Where are you going to get the money? Well, maybe several $1,000s in stimulus checks, several $1,000s in child tax credits, several $1,000s in enhanced SNAP benefits. If you lost your job, frankly, a lot of people were making more sitting on the sofa than they were working. That was enough to cover any kind of inflationary action, so you could pay your bills. Did it work? Child poverty dropped 40% the first when the child tax credit was in effect. 40%. The credit card delinquencies, lowest in 30 years. So obviously what we did worked, but we get no credit for it because the Republicans complain about inflation, no plan, and they haven't had any plan since they've been in control for the last year and a half. But they get credit for complaining. We caught them on the border complaints. They complain about the border. Over in the Senate, they came up with a bill to do something about it. They said out loud, "Oh no, we can't have a bill. If we have a bill, we won't be able to have anything to campaign on." They killed the bill. It was a Republican bill. They killed it. Now they're back to complaining about how bad the border is. I hope people don't let them get away with that foolishness where we conflate complaints with actual solutions. But we've actually been doing something. They complain about healthcare. We've got the lowest percentage of Americans uninsured that we've had in the history of the United States. Everybody has insurance. Everybody has mental health insurance as a part of health insurance because of mental health parity. It's affordable. And yet they keep complaining about it. Their plan, when they had control, was to come up with something that CBO scored it. Costs would go up 20% the first year, 20-some million fewer people insured. The insurance you get is worse than what you already have because you don't have essential benefits. If you got a pre-existing condition, you're going to lose your some of your protections. And they actually passed it in the House and would have passed the Senate, but for the iconic thumbs down by John McCain, killed it in the Senate, and that was the end of it. But they would have actually passed it. Trump would have signed it. That is not better than what we have. Education, the American Rescue Plan. We put more money into K through 12 education in the history of any bill in the history of the United States. And I was chair of the Education Committee at the time. We distributed that money according to the Title I formula, where poverty is the biggest factor. So the ones that needed the most got the most. We had historic contributions to the historically Black colleges and universities, our HBCUs. All politics is local. Hampton got about $100 million. Norfolk State got about $100 million. Virginia State got about 60 million. Union got about 40 million, more than they ordinarily would have gotten. So we did well. We've done well with student loans. Biden has cut the student loan payments in half. A lot of people have had their loans discharged. Some of the public service loan forgiveness plan, Trump wasn't approving any applications. Biden has approved a lot. I had a member of the House of Delegates tell me over the weekend, last weekend, that her $100,000 worth of loans had been discharged because she had been in public service 10 years. So we've been doing that. And so there's a lot that we are doing, and we need people to compare what's going on with Biden, not to the almighty, but to the alternative. On every issue, Trump is worse. And so we need to listen to Trump and his end of democracy. We need to listen to Biden and celebrate what he's done. But most of all, we've got to recognize, as alphas have recognized for 100 years, that a voteless people is a hopeless people. We got to get out and vote. Compare the candidates, get out and vote, and there won't be any question in my mind who people should vote for: Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. And that's why this call is so important, because people will get to know some of the facts and not be misled by the lies of the Republicans. So, Mark, thank you so much for moderating, and look forward to the questions.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Scott. That was a very powerful speech. And with that, we will go to our panel, which includes Congressman Scott, representative of the 3rd District, Commonwealth of Virginia. As he is able to remain with us, I understand that it's a vote day. There may be.
But yeah, they had votes earlier than we expected, so we're done. So
All right,
I'm here.
Good. And we have also Reverend Cozy Bailey, the president of the Prince William County chapter of the NAACP, as well as the associate minister of First Mount Zion Baptist Church in Dumfries, Virginia, who's joining us. Welcome, Reverend Bailey. And eventually, in a short while, we should have Councilman John Chapman, who is a member of the Alexandria City Council. He will be joining us a little bit later. And another thing that I also wanted to mention, that it's the Theta Rho Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. But let us begin with our round of questions, and this is open to anyone who cares to answer. The first one is, how do systemic barriers in voting disproportionately affect Black male voters, and what measures can be implemented to mitigate these issues? That goes to Congressman Scott or to Reverend Bailey.
Well, let me start, and Reverend Bailey can clean up. There are a lot of issues affecting black men. First of all, democracy. If you want to live in a country that's democracy, criminal justice issues, education, all of the issues, and elections have consequences. There will be different view of education, and we've seen on the Republican side, frankly, they do not like liberal arts education. They don't like people who go to college. If you've seen some of these hearings, they take great pride in disparaging liberal arts education. And we need to encourage people to go to college. And if you're not going to go to college, at least get some job training so that you can take advantage of all these jobs that Biden administration has presented. Your health care is at stake. Trump has made it clear that he hates Obamacare. And I told you the replacement he has is demonstrably worse. So I mean, of all the issues of importance, if you compare Biden to Trump, there's no comparison. And so people need to study the issues, whatever you're interested in, whatever issue is important. And I think education criminal justice, healthcare are the three that I've been focused on. Those are the issues that I've been working on as a member of Congress. On each issue, I'd much rather be working with Joe Biden than Donald Trump.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. As always, you are on fire and stay on fire. So Mark, you may have heard the congressman earlier say, not only am I president of the Prince William branch, I am in fact president of the Virginia State Conference of the NAACP since November of last year, and I proudly serve now the entire Commonwealth. So Mark, the focus of your question is, you say, what systemic issues work to prevent Black men from voting? Was that the essence?
I'll ask it again. How do systemic barriers in voting disproportionately affect Black male voters, and what measures can be implemented to mitigate these issues? And I understand that as head of the entire conference over the Commonwealth, that you have to remain nonpartisan in your response. Granted that Congressman Scott has presented some information that may, to some members of the audience, skew a certain way. We understand that there are different choices that we have to make in this de facto two-party system, and we are providing information relevant to those two choices. So
great,
in that context,
and I appreciate that. You know, before I begin, let me say to the audience, I am no less a committed Democrat than Congressman Scott is. However, you didn't ask me the question as a Democrat as you just laid out. You know, Mark, what I like to tell people as I go around the state speaking and working, especially with our young people, and oh, by the way, we have some committed social justice warriors at the University of Mary Washington, as well as throughout the Commonwealth. But I'm focused right now on the University of Mary Washington because members of that NAACP branch there were probably unjustly arrested this past weekend, and I've been working with them. So we should applaud them for standing up to exercise their First Amendment rights. It's not about what they were protesting about. It was the fact that in the legacy of those who have gone before them, you know, you can go back to John Lewis or before him to understand what these young people are doing. But the reason I tie that in is because what they recognize, and I want to make sure that this entire audience recognizes, is that the civil rights movement is not a historical event. It is an ongoing event. And so when we start looking at those systemic issues that have worked against Black men voting, I say all people of color, but the focus tonight is on Black men. We just go back to understanding, as Congressman Scott alluded to earlier, the issues of Reconstruction coming out of slavery, and when we look at the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia and recognize that there are many things that are still contained in there, because that was in fact created during, even though it's been modified several times, during post-Reconstruction. Read that, Jim Crow. That so when we talk about systemic issues, it's because that what that means is it's in codified within the law and within the traditions that work to, and again, I'll continue to go back to the comments of Congressman Scott, that continue to work to repress and repel voting from Black people, especially Black men. The people who have been in power politically in this country are, their biggest fear is a rise of Black men who are politically astute, educated in the way that Congressman Scott talked about, and then ready to be participating in this society, in this democratic republic, this form of government. So what do we do to alleviate that? Well, we have forums like this. We continue education. The worst thing that any Black man can do is to say this election, whichever it is not worth voting for. We should continue to make them understand that the blood, sweat, and tears of a different portion of this civil rights era should not be in vain. That if we continue to press forward, The only way we are going to realize a dream of true democracy, which is a dream for all people, is that if we participate in it by voting, and voting is not the end. After you vote, then you continue to participate in government, whether you are an elected official or not. You help to serve with Congressman Scott and Congressman Byer on a variety of programs and community efforts. You continue to participate in helping them to develop policy, and which will then turn into legislation in the future. So that's the primary way. The problem systemically is that it's been inculcated in the Constitution of the United States and in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and those who are in power continue to use whatever methods they can to repress that vote. But the way we, again, repel that, alleviate that, mitigate that, and change it is through education first, and then passionate motivation to participate in the system afterwards.
Let me make another quick comment. There is legislation pending to restore the Voting Rights Act to its previous form. We lost pre-clearance a few years ago, and it needs to be restored. And we've seen the value or the danger of not having pre-clearance. Several states have had their redistricting, congressional redistricting, overturned. But in the meanwhile, their congressional representatives who are elected in illegal districts got to serve. If you'd had pre-clearance, the plans never would have been approved to begin with. And we would have had representation that we expect out of this election in Alabama, Louisiana, maybe better in South Carolina, Florida, several jurisdictions where, because they did not have to go through pre-clearance, they're able to pass and effectuate illegal plans where people were voting. There are a lot of schemes you can have will make voting easier or harder. You can have or repeal Sunday voting, early voting. You can pass laws like it's illegal to provide food and water for people in line. When you have a bill like that and they actually pass it, the first question ought not be whether or not you ought to be able to feed people in line. The first question is, why are they in line so long that they need a meal while they wait? I mean, how have they constructed the voting process that people got to wait that long? Then you get to the question of, well, since they got to be there that long, why can't they be provided food and water while they're waiting in line that long? But there are a lot of ways that we can make voting easier or harder, and there's a lot of legislation pending to go both ways. Depending on who's elected, we can make voting easier or we can make voting harder.
And let me jump back in there, Mark. Let me bring it home. Again, piggybacking on what the congressman just said. Again, we're talking about Black men voting, right? And you say what systemically occurs that keeps Black men from voting? Well, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and hopefully I'm not about to say something that everybody doesn't know. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, a formerly convicted felon, a returning citizen who wants to have his rights restored, in Virginia is the only place in the union where a petition must be made to the governor and the governor only, and the governor then makes a decision subjectively on whether or not that person's rights will be restored. Now, why is that important to us specifically? Because we all know that the largest percentage of people who are incarcerated in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I dare say almost every other place in the union, are men of color, specifically Black men. So that's how our vote is being repressed. And that's what I meant when I say we have to be involved in making changes to those things. How do we make that change? The NAACP, yes, shameless commercial. The NAACP has requested time and time again for the governor to show us what his objective criteria is. And what we got back was nothing, because we know the criteria is not objective. And so we took him to court, and we will continue to take him to court. As a matter of fact, we have a court hearing on that tomorrow. And see, that's the kind of thing that you have to do. Don't accept it, change it.
Well, because finally on that point, the reason you have to go to court is a new thing, because since 1982, when after Chuck Robb was elected governor, the process for restoring rights has been made easier and easier by each successive governor, Democrat and Republican. Each one made it a little easier than the previous one until
Until now.
until Democrat and Republican, until Governor McAuliffe just restored everybody's rights. He did it in one fell swoop. They took him to court, said you got to do them one at a time. And so he bought a box of pens, one at a time. He restored everybody's rights. Northam followed up and continued that process, automatic. Once you get out of prison, you're automatically restored. And this governor has reversed that and is making people go not only one at a time, but individualized consideration. And there's no telling how many he hasn't done many, and you can't tell why he's done the ones he's done and not the others. So this is putting why you have to go to court in context. From 1982, for more than 40 years, it has been easier and easier, Democrats and Republicans, until this governor.
All right. We do actually have a question in the chat. We'll get to that soon. We can do that right now, actually. Chat real quick. How do we encourage and elevate the voice of the Black male, and what are considered safe spaces and trusted individuals who can and will embrace and motivate the participation of our men?
Well, people know who they trust, and I can't tell them who to trust. That they trust who they trust. But everyone in a position of trust, that is community leaders, neighborhood leaders, business leaders, anybody who's in a leadership position, and people who are not necessarily in a formal leadership position. If you're just a neighborhood respected source, I mean, every neighborhood has people within that neighborhood who are respected individuals. Need to make sure that you are informed and involved and encourage people to get out and vote. But people shouldn't have to wait for somebody to explain to them. People ought to take the initiative and make sure they're registered and their vote. Now, we want to remind people that when there's a registration deadline, that means that you have to register by a certain time to be able to vote in the upcoming election with a regular ballot. If you have not registered to vote and decide on election day, oh, I think I want to vote, fine, get in there and vote. You will be given a provisional ballot. You can register on the spot. You can cast your ballot. It will be a provisional ballot because they got to check out to make sure your registration is good. When it is, you don't have to do anything else. They'll put the ballot in the with everybody else, and the ballot will be counted. But people have to take their own initiative. But the trusted people in the community, people in the leadership position, have to assume the responsibility of speaking out. And if they're leaders, they have to lead.
Right. Reverend Bailey, do you have any thoughts on that?
What I would add to that is, again, in concurrence with the congressman, but I'm going to name some of those folks who ought to be trusted leaders. Every organization that's a member of the Divine Nine ought to be a trusted organization within the Black community. Since we're talking about Black men, we're talking about 5 of those fraternities. That's one place. As he said, our clergy ought to be trusted places, and those voices need to do those things that the congressman just talked about. And not only mentoring and leading, but continually teaching. Folks like Bobby Scott ought to be someone that all of our children within the Commonwealth of Virginia understand who he is and what he does. Those things that Congressman Byers said about Congressman Scott, almost without notes, because he knows him personally. Each one of us ought to be able to say those kinds of things, and not only him, but we ought to be able to say the same things about Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan. We ought to be able to explain that this year in the state General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have a phenomenon that the South has never seen before. What am I talking about? We have, for the first time, a Black Speaker of the House. We have the chairs Let me just make it simple. The people in charge of the money in both houses are African Americans. That is not a trivial thing. And we need to be talking about that constantly. And not only are there an African American woman in the Senate and an African American man in the House, but they are qualified above all others of their colleagues. And we need to be touting those kinds of things also. So when we do those kinds of things, you know, in the tradition of African Americans, teaching the next generation and then talking about it, then we begin to overcome some of the challenges that we have of people just having a malaise and a desire to sit back and give up, as opposed to continuing to fight and again be a part of this democratic process that we have.
All right. Excellent. So we'll move on to our next question. Now, given the current political climate, what strategies should be adopted to enhance political engagement and voter turnout among young Black men?
We set a trend, Bobby. Go ahead. Now you start now, and I'll clean it up.
All right, sounds good. You know, a lot of people ask me, you know, how to communicate with elected officials. What's the best way? Should it be a handwritten note? Should it be an email? Should it be a phone call? It doesn't matter how you get involved or how you communicate. It's the message you're sending. If the congressman doesn't know who you are, it's going to have limited value. If you have communicated with him before and he has reason to believe that you know what you're talking about, the message will be a lot stronger. So you want to make sure that you belong to an organization. If it's an NAACP, I will receive that message different than a message that I don't know who they are or what they know. So the main thing is to get involved in organizations, and that your communication will have the imprimatur of that organization. I've told people, when you go to the school board and say, this is my bright idea, they'll say, thank you, next speaker. But if you go and say, this is my bright idea, and I am chairman of the education committee of the local NAACP, their reaction will be, oh my God, if I don't do it, they're going to sue us. So I have encouraged people, and if you frankly join the NAACP, the first thing you learn is they have a committee for anything you want to get involved in: education, housing, voter registration, healthcare. They have a committee for everything. And if you want to really get involved in those committees. And 9 times out of 10, regrettably, if you want to get involved, you can become the chairman of the committee. And then you go to the school board the next week with a resolution from the NAACP. This is our position, and that's how you really beef up your communications. But one of the elements of Kwanzaa is unity, and the first thing you learn is that individuals are not nearly as powerful as individuals as they are when they are operating as a group. And if you've ever tried to sell out a banquet, trying to sell 300 tickets, you'll never get there selling tickets one at a time. But if you sell 30 tables, you can sell out a banquet. You got to work in groups and have 30 people each by a table, and you're done. So form groups and have the groups speak collectively is a lot more powerful than individuals trying to work just as individuals.
And let me pick up on that last point. I know that the Divine Nine, each and every member, has a formal alliance agreement with the NAACP. And I'm using that NAACP as an example because Bobby just gave some very good examples of how we operate. We should be able to work together. First, as the congressman alluded to, you have to create some relationships. You have to establish yourself. Now, the NAACP is already pre-established, and that's why it's good to work with the NAACP. But the Divine Nine is pre-established also, but not in the same way. But let me give you an example in the community in which I live in Prince William County. In Prince William County, the Divine Nine is known very well by the leadership in the Board of Supervisors, the leadership of the school board, the superintendent of the school board, and all of the county staff, including the police department, the sheriff's department, and the Commonwealth attorney. Now, why is that? Because each one of those entities works within the community in a very positive way. Primarily, and what works the best is the programs that each one of them have, mainly under their own brand, that work with young children. The Deltas have their MLK oratory contest that's famous throughout the Commonwealth. The AKAs have their programs as well, Alpha Academy, Omega U, all of those kinds of things. And then you utilize those so that now you're recognized as someone who's not just coming, wearing your colors, but somebody who's coming to serve the community. And then working back now to that national formal partnership that has been created with the NAACP and other organizations, National Coalition of 100 Black Women, links, you name it. And then you come there and stand there and say, I am the chair of the NAACP Education Committee, while you're wearing your black and gold or purple and gold or what have you. And now you're saying something everybody has to lean forward. That's how you get things done. And this goes back to some comments that I made earlier. Voting is important, but voter mobilization is even more important. One of the things that we need to do a better job of is creating not debates, but forums as we work together, as again, leaning on back to the congressman words, as we work together and are stronger, then we have a more powerful voice that brings people from whatever party they belong to the table in front of our people so that we are better educated. There's a political party who regularly ignores forums that are put on by organizations of color. But if we get together and show them how powerful we are, then they will need those votes, because the country's when I first heard this 20 some years ago, I didn't understand it. The country's getting browner, and the folks who are in power recognize that. And so more and more and more, they need the political power of people of color, especially Black men.
All right. So there's another question from the chat, actually. A couple more. They're actually kind of filtering in. As recently as March of this year, the Washington Post and other reputable publications have reported that predecessor is gaining influence with Black voters, particularly Black men. Do you agree? And if so, how do you explain this gain?
Is predecessor 45? Is that what you mean when you say that?
Yeah, former President Trump. Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. I have. Yeah, go ahead, Bobby.
Well, you have to explain it. I can't explain it, because if you look at all of the elements that people ought to consider when they're voting, comparing Joe Biden to the alternative, not to the almighty, it's kind of hard to make a decent case. Early polling, to a large extent, is name recognition and not substance. I tend to look at, as people learn the issues, what does Trump, what is says upward and downward mobility on the polls, and what is Biden's. I think as people get to know the issues, Biden has plenty of room to grow. I can't see anybody who is not with Trump already finding out something about him that says, oh, I didn't know that, now I'll vote for him. I don't see there's anything in Trump's background that would lead someone to vote for him. Now, when you answer those polls, and I've heard a lot of reports that it's become more and more difficult to get people to actually answer and participate in a poll. a lot of people may not have any more than just name recognition. Oh, I've heard of him. Okay, I'd vote for him. And so I'm not sure how solid it is, but the election is not going to be held tomorrow. The election is going to be held in November. And so it is the Biden campaign's responsibility, with all of his friends helping, to get the word out about what the facts are. And I guess it's Trump's responsibility and all of his friends to try to convince people that he's the best guy. I think as people make their case, that it's much easier to make a case for Joe Biden than for Donald Trump for black men.
Yeah, I agree. I have a position about polls also. I'm very, very skeptical about polls, and that doesn't come from, seeing the results of polls that I disagree with. It comes from my way back in my training of being a mathematician and a statistician, and I know how easy it is for those things to come out. And Bobby just mentioned one of them, which is polls are supposed to attempt to be very objective, but they end up being so subjective that sometimes they have very little value. But to the point of any black man who says that, when y'all ask me to speak, recognize that you got a very blunt speaker. Okay, any black man who comes up and says that he would prefer 45 to anybody else as a candidate needs some re-education. I have talked to folks who have tried to give me rational reasons that the black men I'm talking about, that they would vote for 45, and they make no sense to me. The man has nothing good in store for people of color, specifically black people. All he wants to do, you talk about the original transaction-oriented person, all he wants is your vote. All of the things that are written about him, about he demands loyalty but seldom gives it back, it's inexplicable to me. And that's not based upon a poll. That's based upon onesies and twosies. It's inexplicable.
I have another one from the chat that I wanted to address, which probably goes back to that nonpartisan issue that we were talking about earlier. Aren't black 501c3 orgs like NAACP and Divine Nine organizations and Progress for All, I may add, hamstrung by prohibitions to get involved in politics?
No, we are hamstrung by our inability to think innovatively. If we don't understand the laws that regulate 501c, you name it, 1 through 7 organizations, then we will do things that are idiotic and we will hamstring ourselves. 501c3 laws are very clear, but they do not prohibit us from doing the things and reaching the objectives that we need to reach.
And I think there's no problem with the 501c3 articulating the facts, having forums so that all views can be heard, and encourage people to participate in the election process. I think as people view the issues, it's hard to avoid a conclusion as to who's best, with candidates with views as Joe Biden has and Donald Trump. So articulating facts and positions can't be viewed as anything other than education, and therefore not prohibited by 501c3. Now, when you start participating in a partisan political activity designed to promote the candidacy and advocating the voting for the candidacy of a particular individual, you're getting close to the line. But in this case, I think we're just talking about what the issues are and why on each issue the African-American community is better off with one position than the other. Then you look and see the same candidate has that position that favors the black community.
The triad of voter engagement, it begins with voter registration, then moves to voter education, and then finally voter mobilization. And those are watchwords not only of the NAACP, but also of Divine Nine organizations and other 501c3s. And I hear nothing partisan in there, nothing partisan whatsoever. You know, we sometimes fool ourselves, and the reason I reacted the way I did, we fool ourselves and say, "Oh, we got to stay hands off." You know, one of my opening lines when I talk to folks is that the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization, but it is absolutely a political organization operating within the political process in order to bring social justice change. And we have no problem with the IRS or anybody else. We have problems with those who oppose our ideologies, but you know, they get exposed when they do that. And so that's what I mean about, you know, being innovative, creative. Utilize what the law gives you. Don't be afraid of what the law says.
And Reverend Bailey, I've heard it described slightly different. We're nonpartisan, but we're not stupid.
At
Two
this
thumbs
time,
up.
all right. At this time, I'd like to introduce Councilman John Chapman. He's a member of the Alexandria City Council and also one of our esteemed panelists. Welcome, Congressman Chapman. Full disclosure is also a member of Alfalfa Fraternity Incorporated. And the
thank you.
question, go ahead.
No, I'm listening.
The question that we were discussing, and I'll restate it, aren't Black 501c organizations like the NAACP and the Divine Nine organizations hamstrung by prohibitions to get involved in politics? Just your thoughts on that.
I would say no. I mean, I see a number of 501c3s that are creative about how they get involved, particularly whether they have members or whether they want to, frankly, just speak to issues. I think every 501c3 has a certain number of issues that they want to speak to, and frankly, naturally, there is politics around that issue. But I think if you keep your target on the issue, there is people are always going to kind of attack positions, but your focus is not on political parties. It's not on partisanship. It's about a particular issue, whether that is community engagement, whether it's at the voting booth or in our schools or at City Hall, whether it's economic development, it could be transportation, it could be any of these issues. But if we keep our eye on the issue and not necessarily the politics behind it, I think our 501c3s would be kind of protected from the work that they do. I do want to stop and apologize for being so tardy. We just approved our city's budget, and so had to take care of that before jumping on the call. But glad for the invitation, and I do think we need to be bold about the work that we do in our whether it's NAACP being, joining your local NAACP chapter and being bold about the work they do, or as different chapters of organizations within the Divine Nine, being very bold about what we represent and what we are trying to accomplish, especially if it's issue based. Because for us, voteless people is a hopeless people. Getting people to the ballot box is not a political issue. It is about engagement and having a say in how things work. But it is not an overtly political partisan issue.
Right. There's another question from the chat. Please elaborate on Project 2025 and its potential impact to African Americans and the country in general. That is from the chat. Anybody has any comments on that? Any thoughts on our Project 2025?
I personally am not familiar enough with the details of Project 2025 to make any valuable comments.
All right, no problem at all. Go to the next one. The most high-profile current issues affecting the election, according to the media, are inflation, the war on Gaza, and illegal immigration. What ideas do you have for addressing these issues, which are causing concern and the lack of motivation to support our incumbent administration? That is from the chat.
Well, the first thing I would recommend is we not allow Republicans to get away with complaining as if it were a solution. On the border, as I indicated, a Republican bill it was compromised. It was basically a Republican bill. Was developed by Senator Langford from Oklahoma, Republican senator. Basically a Republican bill. And Republicans killed it and said out loud that if we passed that bill, it would mean we wouldn't have anything to and solve the border problem. We wouldn't have anything to campaign on. They would rather complain than do something. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. And I hope they don't get, I hope people recognize what's going on. They want to complain and get credit for it. The same with inflation. They've been in control in the House for the last year and a half. Name a bill that would help on inflation. They just want to complain about it. You know how much eggs cost? Go to the grocery store, blah, 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 gasoline. They haven't put any money in your pockets. You have a global problem of inflation. You're not going to have any little oasis of no inflation in the United States. It's a global problem, and they have no solution, just a bunch of complaints. And I would hope they wouldn't get any credit for just complaining with no solution. Now, war in Gaza, okay, the Middle East has been a problem for the last 50, 60, 70 years. I don't have a solution to that. Netanyahu, in my judgment, is, I think it's been already said, is a barrier to peace, and is conducting the response to October 7th in a way that leaves a lot to be desired. And I think we're at the point now where our reliable ally has put President Biden and the United States in a very awkward position. The student protests. Let me tell you about student protests. If you look back in history, student protests usually end up on the right side of history. So we shouldn't ignore the student protests, but we should do more than just complain. We got to come up with a solution. I think the ceasefire is important. That's what President Biden has been pushing for a long time. We get the ceasefire to give us an opportunity to do the hostage, to release the hostages, and try to come up with a two-state solution. And Netanyahu says there's not going to be a two-state solution. So I mean, hell, you got to have after you end the war, then what? You have to have a then what? The president of the United States, Joe Biden, has said there ought to be a two-state solution, something he's been fighting for a long time. If we can get that, I think we can bring this thing to a conclusion. I don't know I mean, if they think they're going to defeat Hamas and be killing people until Hamas is defeated, you may never, ever end Hamas. I mean, it's like it's not discrete people. I mean, it's as much of an idea, an ideologue. So I don't know if you can ever defeat Hamas, but that's solving the Middle East crisis. It's been a crisis for the last 70 years, so I don't know what's going to happen to that. I think it would be very difficult frankly, for Democrats to go into election with the war still going on, because our coalition will be pretty well split up. And you can't go into an election with a split up coalition. I think all the parties would be better off with Democrats. I mean, you got Muslims talking about they can't vote for Joe Biden. So what are they going to do? Vote for the no Muslim ban Trump? I mean, you know, the choices are limited here. I mean, you got one of them's going to be president. And we've got people in a situation where I think we can bring the coalition together, but I think we got to get this war ended as soon as possible.
You know, a couple of comments and some different directions there, Mark. What first thing I would ask is, you know, was this you'd say media reports as a result of some poll, you know, and you've already told you how I feel about polls because whoever came up with this list, uh, you know, it sounds like a very conservative list because what it lacks on there is women's reproductive health rights, which is a huge issue, not because the president and vice president are making it, is because though that's a kitchen table issue, just like the inflation and immigration are. And Bobby, yeah, I know it may have been a political crisis for 70 years there in the Middle East, but the crisis in the Middle East has been going on since Ishmael decided he was going to tease Isaac and Abraham threw him and his mama out. Okay, that's how long that's been going on. And and we have to, and I say that kind of jokingly and tongue in cheek, but we have to recognize that some of these challenges are almost as old as civilization itself. They preempt even the creation of this country that we live in. So, with all the other things, I agree with Congressman Scott, but I also say, we have to be careful, put it out there. If, the media says that inflation, Gaza, and immigration are the biggest problems. And so what do you think about that? Now, what do we think our problems are and how we then will decide how we're going to vote? Because we have a very influential voting bloc. So let's talk about coalescing around things that are important to us as opposed to what somebody else told us was important to us.
Councilman Chapman.
Yeah, so I think Congressman Scott started off the same way I'll start off. I mean, the issues around Gaza in the Middle East have been going on, frankly, for all of my life. And I do think it's always been our young people that have kind of been the conscience of our communities, whether they're because we teach lessons to our young people to love each other, to respect each other, to be inclusive, and as many of us grow older, we see how those particular themes are challenged. Right now in the city, we have a group of individuals that are pressing our city council to put together a resolution to kind of call for a ceasefire. And so we're having those conversations within the halls of City Hall, trying to be respectful for all of the positions of all the perspectives of people in our city, but understanding who we want to be as a city, who we want others to be as well, and frankly, what we want our world to look like, even if we know that we cannot, through a resolution or some action within the walls of City Hall, do something really strong about bringing the conflict to an end. We still want to show that we are still guided by our principles. And so I think the conversations that communities, particularly we're seeing at our students and our universities, those conversations, those actions that people are taking, hopefully will lead to more of our communities kind of speaking with one voice, speaking to their congresspeople, speaking to folks higher up in politics to really push those in power in the Middle East to sit down at the table and try to bring conflict to some end.
All right. So we have one more question from the chat, and then I have one final question as we near the 8:30 mark. Question from the chat is, from my conversations with colleagues ages 18 to 25, the concern is mostly that both Biden and Trump have had quote unquote shady path with regard to Black people in America. How would you proceed with hosting these conversations to better motivate the skeptical younger generation? Anybody?
There's a term called that false equivalence. You find a Republican committed murder and say, well, the Democrats committed shoplifting. oh, they're all crooks. No, you have when they say shady past, um, I think a good case can be made on Trump that there have been issues on which the black community has not agreed with Joe Biden. He was sponsor of the '94 crime bill. That was a Democratic initiative. I was on the crime subcommittee in 1994, and I was leading the charge against that bill. So I've been on both sides with Joe Biden. But let me tell you, for a history of being for civil rights, for voting rights, on issues that we believe in, healthcare, you're not going to find a much better friend. And on issues, the same kinds of issues, you're not going to find a worse enemy than Donald Trump. So I don't know how because you've had some differences, you say, oh, we disagree with both of them. No, you have to go issue by issue. You're going to find we've agreed with Joe Biden on some and disagreed with him on others. It's hard to find much you've agreed with Trump. And if you're talking about shady, the man is going to spend the rest of the campaign sitting up in criminal court. I mean, but shabby. And they say, well, what about Hunter Biden? What about Hunter? What does that have to do with Joe? And that's what I mean by false equivalence. You got Donald Trump himself in criminal court, and you blame something on Joe Biden's son. If you can talk about children, how about Jared Kushner taking $2 billion from the Saudis? I want to know if we paid $5 a gallon gasoline because he took $2 billion from the Saudis, and did we get messed up trade deal with China because Ivanka got her patents that she couldn't get before? They gave her her patents, then they cut the deal. Was that a good deal or not? I don't know. Let's study that. If you're going to study something the children did. But I don't. Joe Biden could be a lot richer than he is if he was as shady as that question suggested. He'd be a lot richer than he is. And I think what I like to do is focus on the issues. Yeah, you'll find some we disagreed with Joe Biden, but by and large, his civil rights record is as good as anybody else's. And Donald Trump is about as bad as you can get.
The very construct of the question comes across as a precursor to, since, as Bobby has stated, we're going to deal with this false equivalency, but conceding that since they're both quote unquote shady, then I'm gonna sit it out. Let me tell you something. If you sit it out, you don't get to complain about what you get, and you don't get to take credit for what you get. What a country we have. So we can have a conversation about this democratic republic that we have, and we can say, one of our options is to sit it out, but then we can still reap all the benefits of whatever happens good, as well as, of course, experience whatever happens bad. I do not understand how Black men in America today can understand the history of the blood, sweat, and tears of their grandparents who fought so hard for this right to vote, and then say, well, now that that's over, and it ain't over, but now that that's over, what they did was gave me the right to say whether I want to exercise that franchise or not. It's trite to say, but I believe this. If you're not involved, you're part of the problem. If you don't stand up, listen to those things that Congressman Scott is talking about, as he so eloquently, contrasts the two, first refuting this false equivalency that they're both shady. And then after you wipe that off the table, and then you stand there or sit there and say, well, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and not vote, then you become part of the problem. We have to understand that the struggle of those kids who were on those buses that were getting burned along those roads in the South. We have to understand, as we now have movies that tell us in living color of the history of what those folks went through as they crossed that bridge in Selma, Alabama. We have to understand that the legacy of a woman who said something that rings forever. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That the way we prevent ourselves of being sick and tired of being sick and tired is to exercise our vote and then stay involved. I guess you can tell my passion. The very concept of, well, this one bad, that one bad, so I'm gonna sit on the sidelines, is again incomprehensible to me.
Councilman Chapman. Any thoughts?
Can you do me a favor and repeat part of the question for me?
Let me scroll back up. I've got a number of questions, a flurry of questions to come in right at the last second. You might have to, I don't know what kind of time we have. The question was from the chat. From my conversations with colleagues ages 18 to 25, the concern is mostly that both Biden and Trump have had quote unquote shady pasts with regard to Black people in America. And how would you proceed with hosting these conversations to better motivate the skeptical younger generation?
I mean, I think that conversations are necessary, particularly as the that participant put the question, right? If you have concerns about both of the candidates, I think it's necessary that you make sure that people have as many opportunities as possible to kind of air out their grievances, but also understand that while candidates are going to come with a past, with contradictions of what they've done for Black people in the past, I think it's really, who do you actually think at the end of the day can get something done for you, particularly for our community? Whatever that is, whatever drives you, right? It could be education, it could be criminal justice reform, it could be equitable transportation opportunities, it could be standard of living, be housing quality, whatever. You know, as an elected official, for me, the thing I lean on is who is more policy oriented in the ways that I need them to be. For me, that's a pretty simple answer. And I'll say, you know, if you look at it, it's not really guided by partisanship. But I do think the policies of the Biden administration are going to play out in the future for the best for African Americans. But I really think, you know, having and keeping these conversations going, I can't promise that every conversation is going to motivate people, but I don't think it should determine our lack of opportunities that we give people in our community. I would say that, particularly for our younger people, right? I think the level of political engagement that I had when I was 18 to 25 was pretty high. And I would hate, you know, in my own position, I would hate to kind of limit that for those who are now in the age group, just because of the past of presidential candidates. I think there needs to still be robust discussions about issues, and allow each person to figure out where they stand on those issues and who is going to represent them best.
I have one last question. And then after that, we will wrap it up with 1-minute closings from our panelists. And we will save these remaining questions for next time. But they are very insightful. But my last question is, considering the global nature of student protests and their potential to influence political discourse, can we argue that intensified protests targeting influential PACs might provide politicians with sufficient political leverage to reconsider U.S. military aid to certain nations and potentially compel the leaders of those nations to curtail military action and engage in peace negotiations. What mechanisms exist within the interplay of domestic protests and international policy decisions that would support such an outcome? To anybody.
Yeah,
Well,
let me start off by saying I do not know the answer to that. I would probably have to kind of dig in, roll up my sleeves and dig in to kind of understand what those solutions or those mechanisms could be. So I just want to say that from the outstart.
let me add one thing. There is already on the books legislation that prohibits the providing military aid to people that are in violation of certain statutes involving humanitarian aid. If you are, for example, breaking the law by blocking humanitarian aid, if you are violating the law of war, aid can be withheld. So those provisions already exist, and you don't like to provoke them, but I got to tell you, if you've been listening to this administration, I think they're ready to go there. Netanyahu has made it clear after Biden said, "Don't go into Rafah." Netanyahu said, "I'm going to Rafah. You need a two-state solution. No, not going to be a two-state solution. You got to allow humanitarian aid in. Well, they're continuing to block humanitarian aid. I think the president, Israel is our major ally in the Middle East. It's an area of very controversial controversy, and we've stuck together for a long time. But I got to tell you, Netanyahu is making it difficult for President Biden, and there are in existence already tools that at his disposal that are available. It's the student protests, and one of the problems with student protests is when they become violent, they lose all their support, or if they become gratuitously anti-Semitic, they lose support. But so long as they focus nonviolent on the issue of war, not disparaging people because of their religion, it is a very powerful message. And in a couple of instances, they have hurt their message by slogans and chants that are clearly anti-Semitic. And so you lose your audience when you go there. You lose your audience when you become violent. Most overwhelming portion of colleges have had nonviolent, non-anti-Semitic protests. Those are the ones that don't get covered. So that's just the nature of the media. But so long as you can keep those protests focused on the issue and not slide into anti-Semitism and violence, I think the student protests have a very powerful potential. And like I said, I was in college in the late 1960s, and I know my college got closed down. We didn't have a commencement. I mean, we had I guess we had a commencement, but they kicked us out of. We had to leave campus. We didn't have final exams. They just ended the of the school year. So I mean, they can have, and they're having some of the commencements have been canceled, but now a lot of them have been taken over by outsiders who have different agendas. They want to be violent, they want to be anti-Semitic, and they have hurt the student cause. So we have to watch out for them. But the vast majority of students, no anti-Semitism and no violence, just a powerful message.
Reverend Bailey?
Mark, real quickly, I would say that agreeing with the dangers and the things that cause ineffectiveness, you know, in the current ones, the anti-Semitic language, you know, or any bad language about any particular group, and of course, you know, devolving into violence always, you know, somewhat negates the effect of protests. At the same time, looking back at those 60 or 70 years, you know, alongside of the things that Bobby said earlier about the challenges in the Middle East, we look back at the history of student protests within this country, we will find that when they are done in a nonviolent way, they're extremely effective. We look back at those 4 students from North Carolina A&T who sat down at that lunch counter and took all of that abuse and what that began as another phase of progress within the civil rights era. We look back at the variety of student protests, specifically in the year 1968, where there were peaceful and non-peaceful protests, but the end result largely attributed to those protests was a more rapid, though still gradual, withdrawal from armed forces of the United States being in Vietnam. And so I don't know how this current day protest is going to end up. I would like for them to eliminate the horrifying anti-Semitic speech. I would like for them to stay nonviolent. But I am convinced that in some way, if they continue in the way that it appears as it is growing, that it will in fact have an influence on policy going forward.
All right. We are at the end of our first town hall, and now I would like to open the floor for closing remarks, 1-minute closing remarks from any of our 3 panelists.
Well, Mark, let me just say that this is a forum that is very important and needs to be repeated over and over and again. People need the opportunity to ask questions. People need the opportunity to get facts out there so we know what we're talking about and people can make informed decisions. Leaders will go and make the case to others. But everybody has a responsibility to put these kinds of programs together. I want to thank all of the groups involved, particularly Black and Gold, for putting this together. And I look forward to the next one. You know, just count on me. I think these are important, and you've done a great job. Thank you.
All right.
No, I agree. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I hope that I've contributed in some way and helped edify the voices and the ears who have been hearing tonight. You know, one of the things I think that we all need to do is since Congressman Scott didn't have a commencement, we need to give him one. You know, because he's a great man, and every man who goes to college deserves a college commencement exercise. I want to thank all of you alphas for indulging this strong Omega man. I don't wear black and gold. As you can see on my wrist, I do purple and gold. Now, actually, black and gold does look good sometimes. And lastly, I do want to give a shout out to the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, of which my wife is a very proud member, and she's in Omicron Chi Omega chapter here in Prince William. Finally, Bobby, I want to wish you a happy birthday. I will see you tomorrow night. Unfortunately, Andrea probably will not be there because she will be out running real hard, trying to join you up on Capitol Hill.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Well, the birthday was yesterday.
Yes, I know that. That's why I didn't sing to you. I may sing to
Thank
you
you.
tomorrow when I see you there.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to President Lang and to our chaplain Crooms, LeVar Crooms. Thanks to Kirsten. Thanks to everybody who helped out with the technical issues that we will get resolved. And we will definitely be doing another one of these town halls soon within the month. It'll probably be no later than June, but I want to do more than one per month. So be on the lookout and stay tuned. Thanks everybody and have a great evening.